Hello and welcome to the Rational Black Thought Podcast. I am your host, Neil Grio, and this is episode number 252. It is October the 18th, 2025. And our title for the episode this week is a quote from Angela Davis that I feel is very appropriate for this week's episode. And that quote is, I feel that the reason why racism is so blatant is because it has helped those capitalists gain more and more profit. So, our theme today in what we go through is going to be follow the money. Because when you look under the covers, racism is really about exploitation. And I think any of you that have listened for some time know that my preferred definition of racism is the systematic exploitation of one racial group to the benefit of another, and that benefit is both economic, social, and political. So there's always an economic component to it. But let's go ahead and get to our agenda for today and see what we have to cover. So, first up is the intro that we're going through now. And then after that, we're going to have quote of the week. As I've already mentioned, the title is the same. However, I have a more extensive version of the quote that we're going to go through in the quote of the week by Angela Davis. After that, we will get to unmasking the news. And the first story is, I'm just calling it a mirror to political hypocrisy. And I'm going to do something I don't typically do. I'm going to talk a little bit about both sides-ism as it relates to a major political issue that's going on right now. But I am going to refine it a bit because, again, it's never really just both sides are doing the same. After that, there's something that came out in the news that proves without a doubt that racism isn't a bug in the GOP, it is a feature. And then there's all too common story of father or priest as predator. And then we'll end the news segment on a good note with a blueprint for black futures. After that, this week is our week for Bible study. So it's Bible study with an atheist, and we're going to talk about the man-made evolution of Christianity. And then we'll have reflections on the show for this week, and then call to action, and then we'll close things out. So what we're going to do right now is take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to cover the quote of the week. All right, welcome back. And as I said, we're going to talk about the quote of the week. And the quote of the week this time is from Angela Davis. And here's the full quote that I wanted to go through. Quote, I feel that the reason why racism is so blatant, and it has been part of the history of black people from the time we were first kidnapped from the shores of Africa, is because it has helped those capitalists gain more and more profit. If you look at any factory or plant, who does the worst jobs? Who gets paid the smallest salaries? It's black people. So racism serves as a buttress, as a justification for super exploitation. And I feel that if we're going to talk about the total liberation of black people, we first have to liberate ourselves from the material conditions of our oppression. And for the most part, I think that that quote is what we have been talking about in all of the strategies for black power that we've come to, because we recognize that this is both this battle is a cultural battle, it is a political battle, and it is also an economic battle. And what Angela Davis is doing here is cutting straight to the economic anatomy of racism, stripping away the moral fog and showing that what most people call racial hatred has always been at its core a business model. When she says racism has been blatant from the time we were kidnapped from Africa, she's not talking about individual prejudice. That doesn't really matter. When we're talking about racism, we're talking about the systematic and the systemic nature of it. So she's describing a system, a centuries long economic engine built on black labor, stolen land, and stolen lives. From the slavery ship to the sweatshop, racism has been the ideological grease that keeps capitalism running smoothly. And if you listened last week, we had talked about how capitalism has failed black people. So when Davis points to looking at any factory or plant and asks who does the dirtiest jobs for the smallest pay, she's revealing that racism isn't just a social ill, it is a cost-saving mechanism for capitalism. It allows employers to justify paying some people less by convincing the public that these people are worth less. Racism becomes a tool of economic control, not just a moral failure. And the phrase buttress and justification for super exploitation is crucial here. She is saying racism props up the entire economic structure. It's the ideological scaffolding that makes exploitation appear natural. It is just the natural order of things, the way that it is proposed. Without the myth of black inferiority, the economic disparity would be indispensable. If you didn't say that black people were genetically inferior, then there would be no way to justify the obvious wealth and wage gaps that we see. And finally, Davis insists that liberation must start with the material conditions of our oppression. In other words, you can't mediate, march, or pray your way out of poverty and exploitation while the system that creates exploitation and poverty remains intact. Freedom isn't just psychological or culture, it is economic. To truly free black people, we must dismantle the economic order from our subjugation. We have to change the system, which is why I say we need to be a nation within a nation, and that nation needs both a political governance structure as well as an economic structure. So in short, racism isn't accidental. It is profitable in America and around the world. The capitalist system needs racial hierarchy to justify exploitation, to justify the extraction of the product that we produce to the benefit of white people. That's what is happening in a racist society. So true black liberation requires not just civil rights, but economic revolution, a break from the material conditions that make racism useful to those that are in control. So Angela Davis is reminding us that capitalism depends on cheap labor and racism will never be a glitch. It will always be a feature as long as it is able to produce that. All right, that is our quote from the week from Angela Davis. So we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll get to unmasking the news. All right, welcome back. And welcome to the segment Unmasking the News, where we try to expose the truth behind the headlines and highlight what matters for our community. And this week we have several stories as usual. First up, a mirror to political hypocrisy. After that, racism isn't a bug, it's a feature. And after that, father as predator, and then ending on a good note with a blueprint for black futures. So let's go ahead and get to the first story, a mirror of hypocrisy. And so what I want to talk about this week is unmasking the shutdown. So we are in a shutdown of the government now that is going on a couple of weeks. And I want to take an article that came out and also some political polling and talk about exactly what it means, especially as it relates to black people. So, Washington is frothing again over what it calls a funding stalemate. The truth is really uglier than that. This isn't incompetence, it is theater. The government has now been shuttered for weeks, and yet both parties posture as if they were victims of circumstance rather than architects of this mess. Now, like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about both sides because I think that in some ways the Democrats are not playing this as the way they should, but I want to make sure that this is, in fact, a Republican problem. This is a Republican generated problem. And so I'm not trying to say that the Democrats are causing it as well, but there is some hypocrisy on the part of the Democrats, which I think that in order for them to have a better political polling on this issue, they would need to understand it and explain why it is, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But as of now, a new AP NORC poll shows that Americans are not really amused by this shutdown. Roughly 60% of the respondents assign a great deal or quite a bit of the responsibility to Trump and the congressional Republicans, while 54% point to congressional Democrats. Now, from that, you can see, and of course, there is a margin of error. And with a margin of error, you can see that it is fairly close. And of course, that is, when you look into the details of it, it is overly weighted with the Republicans blaming the Democrats and the Democrats blaming the Republicans. The good news for the Democrats is that the majority of the independents are also blaming Trump and the Republicans. But the public sees the shutdown as a big deal. 54% of Americans call it a major issue, and the blame is spread, yes, but that doesn't excuse the hypocrisy that we see. It just sharpens it. Now, one of the things that we need to look at here in this particular shutdown over some of the others in the past is we need to look at how long this is going to last. So shutdowns are often remembered as anomalies, but in truth, they are just simply recurring weapons in our political arsenal. That is the way that both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, tactics that they use in order to try to get what they want. So the 2018-2019 shutdown lasted 35 days and left deep scars. And of course, in 2018 and 19, that was under Trump presidency as well. What distinguishes this shutdown is the level of polarization and brinksmanship. And the Washington Post warns that this one may outlast past closures precisely because both sides are less tethered to compromise than ever. And so, and as you know, where we're at right now with this particular shutdown is that the Republicans are asking the Democrats to vote on what they're calling a clean bill, which is what the Democrats had, and when they were in charge, had asked the Republicans to vote on. The Republicans were against it, but now they are the proponents of a so-called clean bill. They were against it when they were trying to say that to reopen the government, they needed to do some of the things that the Republicans wanted done. But now that the Democrats are doing the same thing, the Republicans are calling the Democrats hypocritical, which in a way they are. But this is why I said they need better messaging, because they need to be, and they're trying to do this, but I just don't think that they're doing it as effectively as they need to. They're trying to generate the idea that the reason for them not signing a clean bill and reopening the government is because of the catastrophic impact that would have on the health care for middle class and people that are living lower on the economic scale in this country, if they were to do so. Because they know, and the Republicans know, even though they are saying we can discuss health care after the government reopens, we know the discussion would just be, fuck no, we're not going to do it. So the Democrats know that. So they know as soon as they reopen the government, that the healthcare subsidies will disappear and the majority of, or a large percentage of Americans' healthcare costs are going to skyrocket. But anyway, when we take a look at this, where we are right now, my working hypothesis is that we're headed into a protracted shutdown. Weeks could become months, and the usual pressure points: furloughed federal employees, travel delays, stalled regulatory agencies will just escalate. And the danger is that as time drags, outrage will atrophy into resignation or cynicism, and then, for the most part, I think that both parties are trying to count on that decay. But I think the Republicans more so than the Democrats, because the Republicans don't want this going in too far into 2026 if they are, as it is right now, going to be getting 60% of the blame. Because even though there's only a 6 percentage point difference, that is still significant enough to say that if this goes in too far into next year, that the Republicans and Trump will be blamed for it. And speaking of blame, who gets blamed is going to matter for 2026. So historically, the party in control, or perceived to be in control, receives a heavier blame in a prolonged shutdown. In 2018, 2019, the polling showed that more Americans blamed Trump and the Senate Republicans than Democrats. And early polling, as I said, already indicates that this pattern is beginning to hold. More Americans tie responsibility to Trump and the GOP than to the Democrats. For 2026, though, that could be fatal for Republicans if the shutdown drags deep into an election season. Now, hopefully it won't, but the only way that I can see that it won't is if the Republicans give in and actually give the Democrats some relief on health care, which even if they do that, that could prove fatal for the Republicans in 2026, because it would show the Democrats exerting some power, which those of us who are on the progressive side anyway have been looking for them to do. But there is a nuance to it. The Democrats aren't immune. If their messaging misfires, and I don't think it is clear and sharp as it should be now, or if they are seen as obstructionists, especially when the crisis starts to touch health subsidies or social welfare, then they may bleed losses too. And so the polls already hint that Democrats aren't rallying around this as a wave issue. They're trying, that is the shutdown, what they're trying to do, and I think it is the right approach, but I think they need to be more effective, is they're trying to link this and tie it directly to whether or not there is relief for healthcare recipients. So for 2026, the narrative battleground will be blame, competence, and moral high ground. The Republicans will argue that they tried clean bills, and Democrats will call GOP overreach and gutting America's healthcare system. And whoever convinces the fence sitters will tip the scales. And unfortunately, the fence sitters are, quite frankly, just not that bright. Anybody that voted for both Trump and Obama, in my opinion, has some deep issues that they need to deal with and probably are incapable of doing so. So I'll close this story out by talking about then all of this clean bill bullshit in a little bit more detail. And this is where the hypocrisy really spoils. Both parties scream for clean continuing resolutions when they are the ones that are proposing the bill, when they are the ones in charge. Yet neither actually wants a fully clean bill. The Republicans insist they'll support a CR without any extra policy demands until you look at the fine print. Then you find out that social programs, defunding plans, and other ideological demands are buried already in it because they have already passed their so-called big, beautiful, fuck you in the butt bill. And so, and if they just simply fund the government, then that is what will take place. So the bill that they published in September was called clean, but it excluded extensions for Affordable Care Act's tax credits, which is a core demand from the Democratic side. So the Democrats, for their part, decry any CR that leaves out healthcare predictions, but they too have inserted demands and have also called for clean bills when they were the ones that were proposing it. So, and to me, though, again, what the Democrats want, sustaining subsidies, protecting Medicaid, and resisting cuts, are all things that I think the majority of the of American public would also want. But there is a core Trump base of support that does not want that. And so the Democrats are claiming the moral high ground, and I believe they have a right to do so because they are on the right side. But we're negotiating class warfare in the meantime. So when either side shouts clean bill, what they really mean is their version of clean. And what the Republicans want is a clean bill that helps the richest Americans prosper and kicks the poorest of Americans to the curb. And what the Democrats are trying to do is to limit the benefits to the rich and to increase the benefits to the middle class and the poor. And of course, I'm on the side of the Democrats in that particular issue. All right, let's go on to the next story. And I'm pretty sure that you saw a lot on this. So Politico leaked or released some leaked transcripts from chat messages from young Republican organizations, or Telegram rather. Or I think it was Politico, but it was on Telegram as the platform, and they were leaked, and it was completely and totally hateful. But it wasn't a surprise to me, and I don't think that it should be a surprise to anyone. So if you needed proof that the modern Republican Party is a veneer over white supremacist foundations, then the recent leak of the Young Republican group chat should be Exhibit A. Behind the polished press releases and brand management, it is a cesspool of virulent racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and idol worship of genocidal ideologies. And when exposed, the party's top leaders do not repent, they double down. They double down on this shit and say nothing to see here. So Politico recently revealed more than 2,900 pages. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the graphic that has been going around, which is just some clips of some of the things that were in there. But there were actually 2,900 pages of this shit where these so-called young Republicans were talking about, in one case, I love Hitler, and talking about raping their opponents or a woman, and also talking about sending people to gas chambers. And so, and these were members of the Young Republicans across New York, Kansas, Arizona, Vermont, and even in other states. Now, the participants, many holding or vying for office roles, trafficked in explicit Hitler, praise of Hitler, casual reference to gas chambers, jokes about rape, and repeated slurs against Black, Jewish, and LGBTQ communities, and often admiration for slavery. And so you know where they want to go, make America great again, is let's put all of these Black people back in the fields picking cotton for us. Well, they don't need us for cotton anymore, so it would be some other menial job for free that they'd want us to do. And the content isn't marginal. One of the chatters wrote, I love Hitler, and others compared political opponents to Jews who should be gassed. They said, quote, should be gassed. And rape was described as epic, and slurs against Black and queer people appeared with horrifying regularity. And this is not just boys being boys, as the Republican Party tries to say. These are political acolytes and future operatives and some current office holders. And these men and women are being groomed for power, and they are communicating from the expectations that their words and their worldview will go unchecked. Not just go unchecked, but will be received happily. That this will put them in a position to be a success within the GOP. And then we have J.D. Vance. So what did this fuckwad have to say? So when pressed to condemn it, do you think he did? No, he didn't. Instead, he treated it like a frat prank. He told the public that, quote, kids do stupid things, end quote. That's what he said. And he said, quote, these were, quote, edgy jokes, and scolded critics for what he said, quote, destroying lives over offensive jokes, end quote. He is married to a Hindu, an Indian Hindu. And the racist text messages that were in there were for black and brown people, and so for his wife too. And so does he condemn it? No. He says it's just a joke. So calling his wife out of her name and talking about raping his wife, I guess to him wouldn't be a big fucking deal. And this is not innocence. It's a signal. What Vance is doing, he's doing exactly what every modern white supremacist does. He normalizes the rhetoric, minimizes the harm, and then frames the outcry as an overreaction. The tactic is to shift the burden not to the perpetrators of this racist ideology, but to those who demand consequences for this racism. By refusing to condemn the ideology behind the content, Vance validates it. It's a tactic grant of permission to hate from the second highest office in the land, in the GOP. He's telling them it's okay to be a fucking racist. And this isn't outsider rage. This is a core doctrine of the GOP. Because some will try to paint these leaks as a distortion or some deep state traps. But these motherfuckers were communicating with each other, and the facts stand that these were internal, sustained discussion over months. And many of the participants were not naive interns or but were established state-level leaders or party insiders. One was a Vermont state senator, and others held government or advisory posts within the GOP. And also, some of their messages even say, if what we're saying gets out, we're fucked. And it did, but they are not really fucked because the GOP doesn't give a shit. So when you strip away the mask, the family values and the pro-life rhetoric and the religious freedom bullshit, you find the same impulses: preservation of white Christian nationalism, fear of demographic change, and a contempt for those who demand equality. And this is important for a lot of different reasons, but the main thing is that these so-called young Republicans are tomorrow's governors, senators, and party operatives. These are the people who are going to be in office. And and what J.D. Vance and the rest of the GOP did in response to this, which was essentially nothing, is a normalization of extremism. And it is for voters who believe in human dignity, justice, and pluralism, this should be a red line. And the GOP's refusal to purge its own indicates that they view racism not as a flaw, but as a strength. They view racism as where they can take this fight to win elections in the future, because they believe that the majority of Americans are with them. And unfortunately, they may be right. After all, Trump did win the majority vote, and this shit was well known even before then. So here are my final words on this story. The GOP's public facade is one of order, respectability, and tradition, but this leak pulls back the curtain, which was already pulled back anyway, and we see a party that's built not despite racism, but because of it. It is the energizing force within the Republican Party. It's the goo in the gears, the oil in its wheels. It's belief in racial hierarchy, ethno-religious exclusion, and contempt towards those outside its tribe is what the GOP is all about. It is how they win today. And so if we allow a party that traffics in hate to evolve unchecked, then our definition of democracy, of decency and justice, all lose purchase. So if we cannot defeat the GOP in 2026, then it proves without a doubt that this is America. This is America. Racism, outright praise of Hitler, outright praise of slavery and slavery conditions, outright misogyny and hatred of women. This is what, if we as Americans vote for this in 2026, then we're going to get exactly what the fuck we deserve. All right, let's go on to the next story. And this one is one of those stories that I say that I could talk about every week, which I don't like to. But I still feel that it's necessary to call it out when it happens. So this latest horror from New Orleans is a former priest, Mark Francis Ford, has been arrested and charged with sexual abuse of a disabled boy for over a decade, exploiting grief, trust, and his position in a ministry that he co-founded, which was called God's Special Children. So the individual that he assaulted was special needs. He was on the spectrum, and he had also just lost his one of his parents and I think a brother. And so this priest came in supposedly to comfort and help him, but instead sexually exploited him. So the church that claims to shepherd the innocent is again exposed for harboring wolves. And every time this happens, the predictable dance begins. Denial, soft apologies, legal maneuvering, but never true repentance or structural reform. So Ford, this former priest, allegedly preyed upon the vulnerable, a child already mourning the loss of family, presenting himself, the priest presented himself as a mentor, a friend, and a spiritual safe space before morphing into something monstrous. The horror is in the pattern: religious authority, access, isolation, a formula repeated across decades and dioceses. So let's call this hypocrisy what it is. Religious leaders often seek positions not to administer virtues, but as fronts for their predatory fantasies. A lot of these priests are pedophiles, quite frankly, and they get to the priesthood so that they can get a good inventory of vulnerable victims. And so these stories emerging from this scandal only differ in the names and the timelines, but like I said, this shit happens all the time. And the method is always the same: cloak predation in sacraments, bury victims in bureaucracy, and brand objectors as schematics or blasphemers. In New Orleans, the Archdiocese has long been accused of covering up abuse. This very institution that files bankruptcy to limit liability has simultaneously preached forgiveness, sanctity, and healing. Meanwhile, sports franchises have been roped into the cover-up. The Saints and the Pelicans reportedly assisted the church in crafting public relations responses to their scandals. And so the message is clear: protect the institution at all costs, even if it means protecting predators in the process. So what does it say that a church whose doctrine pivots on compassion and sacrifice and the love of children is governed by people who betray those ideals every single fucking time they get? That many clergy postured as shepherds or all along hunters wearing shepherds' robes is a problem. And the faith that tells you God sees all, that is run by men you hope that would say something, but they all remain silent. They don't tell what's going on. They just hide it all from the authorities. And let's be clear, this is systematic. It is not isolated. So don't let anyone sell you on the once in a while bad apple narrative. The allegations against Ford are one among hundreds in the New Orleans Archdiocese alone, and claims have triggered bankruptcy, internal cover-ups, and decades of secrecy. Priests confessed to church authorities decades ago, and church leadership often shuffled them to new parishes instead of reporting them. Clergy abuse survivors across Louisiana have spoken out about shared victims, that is, the priests sharing victims amongst themselves and rotating assignments of just moving priests to another location to abuse the victims of another priest that was moved to where that priest came from. So we must remember, power structures that shield abusers are not passive. They are deliberate. The installation of bishops, the Vatican's diplomacy, diocesan cover-ups, all part of an ecosystem that protects prestige over people. That's what they are attempting to do. So when people tell us that the church is holy, remind them that institutions don't sanctify themselves. They are sanctified by the choices of their members. And when those choices consistently favor protection over silence, and silence over the institution of protecting children, then that institution is profane. And so in this story, as in all the others, the lesson is relentless. When religious leaders claim authority over morality, we must demand their morality be publicly verifiable. The cross doesn't forgive the crime or justify it. It must be through the justice system that they are either vindicated or punished. All right, that is it for that despicable story. Let's go on to the next one and end on a good note. So in this particular case, I don't typically like to just do feel-good puff pieces, but every once in a while a story kind of breaks through the noise and demands some recognition, not because it is talking about someone who is perfect, but because it offers a model that is of integrity in a world built on compromise. And in this particular case, we're going to talk about Emil Will Beacon's story, and I can think that is one of those that has broke through the noise. So Black Enterprise recently ran an article called Elevating Your Excellence. Media maverick Emil Will Beacon forged a movement from vibe to native son. And it traces a life shaped by adversity, artistic vision, and unapologetic self-assertion. And that matters especially for a culture that too often rewards assimilation and punishes authenticity. So Will Beacon began as a kid in Cleveland who struggled with undiagnosed dyslexia, but was driven by a hunger for language and narrative. His parents, both professionals, his mother was a judge and a sociologist, and his father a structural engineer and lawyer, instilled in him a near religious respect for education. So not for religion, but for education and self-discipline. He went to Hampton University, studied mass media arts. Then he earned a journalism degree at Columbia. But those credentials alone don't explain his influence. What makes Will Beacon exceptional is the way that he consistently pushed the boundaries of inclusion in Black media culture. As a founding editor of Vibe, he didn't simply curate from the margins. He demanded that those margins be part of the center. He didn't just, under his leadership, Vibe won the National Magazine Award for General Excellence in 2002. And the first urban magazine to beat out contenders like The New Yorker and Wired. That win wasn't just prestige, it was a crack in the gate. Black culture, Black aesthetics, Black voices not allowed, but pushed into the competitive critical space by Will Beacon. He moved it there. And he didn't just rest on that. He didn't become satisfied. He pivoted, evolved, and then founded Native Son, now a platform for Black, gay, and queer men to exist fully in family, business, art, and thought. And he named it in conversation with Baldwin's notes of a Native Son, signaling that this is not a soft rebrand, it is a claim to legacy, dignity, and visibility. And if you don't know why, then that's something you need to figure out. So to me, his career is deeply instructive, not because Will Beacon is perfect again or a perfect person, but because he models something that is too rare. and that is how to build from inside exclusion, not simply to wait to be included. And so, and that's what I really praise him for and congratulate him on this article in Black Enterprise. So, to close out, in a media ecology where Black stories are often curated by outsiders, Will Beacon is a counterforce. He refuses to let the edges define him or let power decide whose voice is worthy. His life is a kind of blueprint how to walk through the trauma, the invisibility, the criticism, and still hold your own narrative with dignity and strategy and generational vision. And when you tell someone the world is rigged, they'll nod, but when you show them someone working from inside that rigged system against the grain, bending the arc, then people sit up and notice, and Emil Beacon's work does that. It says we can build autonomous Black cultural power ourselves, and we can refuse erasure. We can claim our fullness for our youth, for our queer siblings, for our future, and that's the kind of good news that the movement needs today. So I definitely congratulate him on that. All right, so this has been Unmasking the News, seeing through the mask of the news and exposing what really matters. And so we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to have Bible study with an atheist. So that's what's up next. All right, welcome back. And welcome to Bible Study with an Atheist. And as I mentioned to you, our topic for today is the man-made evolution of Christianity. So what are we going to talk about? Well, first of all, I want to provide you some background with my approach to this. So my Bible study is where we put scripture and stories built around it through the only divine test that matters, evidence. So we don't use faith, which is a poor epistemology. It can't teach you shit. Instead, we look at the facts of the matter and then give you the basis of what we see, utilizing the Bible and biblical stories, and in this case, biblical history, to do that. So this week, what I want to do is take you on a journey, not a spiritual one, but a historical autopsy. We are dissecting the corpse of Christianity to see how a failed Jewish apocalypse movement became the world's most profitable religion. And spoiler alert, it wasn't a God's plan. It was marketing, politics, and power all the way down. And if you are looking at this on YouTube, you can see I have a graphic up the timeline of Christianity. And it talks about, on the left side, theological differences, Catholics, Protestants, etc. And then it has a timeline from Jesus's birth through to today. But the primary thing that I want to point out on this is it's talking about 6 million Christian books in print and 50 million CDs and downloads sold annually. And that's what I'm going to walk you through, how this Christianity just became a fucking business. So that's what we're going to look at. And so first of all, where we want to start, though, is pre-Christianity. So we start even before there was a Christianity. So let's be clear, and I've taught this in some past Bible studies. Jesus of Nazareth wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew preaching to Jews about Jewish problems. His message wasn't about everyone holding hands in racial harmony. It was about the restoration of Israel. The quote, kingdom of God he kept shouting about wasn't some celestial paradise in the sky. It was a political vision. He wanted Yahweh to overthrow Rome and reestablish Jewish rule. That's what Jesus was preaching. And let's be honest, Jesus wasn't preaching universal equality either. He wasn't saying blessed are all humanity. He said, quote, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel, end quote. And that's in Matthew chapter 15, verse 24. Look it up if you don't believe me. And he called non-Jews dogs. Dogs. The idea that Jesus was the original humanitarian is a pious lie told by people who never read the text. What he offered was an intra-Jewish reform, not a global enlightenment. His compassion was tribal, his ethic was conditional, and his revolution was local. At the time, Judaism itself was kind of a crowded house of rival sects. The Pharisees, who believed that holiness was found in meticulous law keeping, so they went through the Old Testament, the law, and were very, very picky about following it to the letter. And then you had the Sadducees, who were aristocrats, collaborators with Rome, who controlled the temple racket and were the ones that Jesus turned over their tables because they were selling shit in the church. And then you had the Essenes, the desert mystics, who taught that the world was ending. And then the Zealots, the ancient version of freedom fighters with daggers instead of guns. So Jesus, he didn't found a fifth branch. He raided all four of those ideas. He borrowed apocalyptic urgency from the Essenes, the populism from the Pharisees, moral fury from the prophets, and political rage from the Zealots. And that cocktail made him dangerous enough to get killed, but not organized enough to start a church. But what happened then? Then came the crucifixion. The moment that history should have forgotten Jesus altogether, but myths, like viruses, mutate to survive. So his followers at that point were faced with the same problem that every prophet's cult faces when the prophet fails, or the prophecy fails, because Jesus, again, was preaching the overthrow of Rome in his time. And in fact, he said that there were people alive during his speech that would see the kingdom of God come. And because, again, he wasn't talking about heaven. He was talking about God coming back and overthrowing the Romans and putting the Jews back in charge. So his prophecy failed. And so the question came up then, how do you explain away the fact that the world didn't end, or that that God didn't come and overthrow Rome? You spiritualize the failure. That's how you do it. You twist it. So the kingdom didn't come because he's ruling now in heaven. Viola, failure becomes a triumph, and just like that, a failed rebellion turned into a theology. And so basically, the way that happened was, first of all, immediately after Jesus' death, they were saying, well, that didn't work. The prophecy didn't work. So what now? And enter Paul of Tarsus, or actually Saul, who was then renamed Paul. He was a franchise manager of this new faith. So Paul never met Jesus, but that didn't stop him from claiming exclusive insight into his cosmic significance. Though he never met Jesus, he was the one who wrote most of the shit that you say come from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about what Jesus said or didn't say. And he'd never even met him. So, but this is where Christianity takes its first major left turn. And that is because the Jews weren't buying the story. After Jesus died, like I said, Jesus had been preaching only to the Jews, but after he died, most of the Jews were like, well, he's dead now, so fuck that. He didn't come and overthrow Rome, so he's just a failure. And so they had their law, the covenant, and their own apocalyptic prophets, so they didn't need Jesus. And this was just another dead man on a cross, since they were killing a lot of people on cross. And so Paul pivoted. He decided to go to the Gentiles. And so it was never Jesus that did that. It was Paul. And so Paul stripped away the parts of Judaism that made conversion hard. He said, you don't have to get your dick clipped. You don't have to go by any dietary laws. You can eat whatever the fuck you want, including that swine. And of course, that's when black people could start coming in. That's a bad joke. But no endless rituals or purity codes at all. Paul said he took a tribal religion that was only for the Jews and opened it up to the market. And he was less theologian and more salesperson. Grace was his pitch, salvation his product, and and if you believe you're in, no surgery required in Paul's religion, in his Christianity. In the modern world, we'd call that rebranding. In Paul's world, it was just revolutionary marketing. So for the next few centuries, Christianity was just a street brawl. There were competing philosophies. There were the Ebionites who stuck with the Jewish law and rejected Paul entirely. The Gnostics who believed that salvation came from some secret knowledge, not faith, and they believed it was all mystical. The Americanites who flat out rejected the Old Testament God as an evil demiurge. And of course, the proto-Catholics who were busy claiming that their version was the only one that really counted. So the Bible wasn't handed down from heaven. It was curated by editors in smoke-filled rooms arguing over which scrolls would play well in Rome. Because not only did Jesus' message of Rome getting overthrown not happen, what ended up happening, in fact, was the exact opposite. Rome co-opted the Christian church, and we'll get to that part next. So then comes the Roman Empire and the plot twist that changed everything. Constantine, who was the emperor of Rome at the time and a shrewd politician, saw in this messy sect that was going on at the time, all these people arguing about a bunch of bullshit, all different kinds of Christian-based religions, because some of them were so different they couldn't even be called the same. But what he saw was that it offered a disciplined hierarchy and the promise of cosmic legitimacy for imperial power. And so he made a deal with the cross. In 325 CE at the Council of Nicaea, bishops didn't receive revelations, they took votes. They decided which version of God was official policy. Jesus was declared as, quote, of one substance with the Father, end quote, but not because of divine insight, but because Constantine wanted unity, and unity requires a dogma. And you may have heard that Constantine supposedly saw a symbol in the sky, and he said that he heard a voice from heaven, i.e. God, saying, by this conquer, or conquer by this. Now, many people think that it was a cross that he saw in the sky, but it wasn't a cross. It was the symbol, if you're looking at this on YouTube, that you see on the screen next to the image that says Constantine, architect of modern Christianity. It is an X and a P. And it is the first Greek letters for the word Christos. So X and P is the first few letters of Christos, and this is the chi rho symbol that you see a lot of modern Christians using as well, because it's the same thing. It is the state sanction, or actually it is the religion being co-opted by the state in order to be able to control the individuals in the state. So from there, the church became the empire in robes. So pagan rituals were repackaged. The winter solstice became Christmas. That's where it came from. Fertility festivals became Easter. The Virgin Mary conveniently mirrored every other goddess from Isis to Diana. And the Romans didn't convert to Christianity. Christianity converted to Rome. So people say, a lot of people want to say that the Romans were the ones that expanded Christianity because they adopted it, but they didn't. They took Christianity in all of its myriad forms and consolidated it down into a doctrine that would give them divine power in order to rule. And Constantine was one of the most brutal of the emperors. Right after supposedly seeing that symbol in the sky, he killed his family members and a bunch of other people, and murdered a bunch of other people from other countries. So what happened next? Well, then you get like baby Christianity. So you fast forward a few centuries and you get the Great Schism of 1054. The Roman Catholic West and the Orthodox East realize that they can't stand each other. The split wasn't about God, though. It was about control, money, and power, as always. And then came the Reformation, when Martin Luther had the nerve to notice that selling salvation was a bit tacky. So the church excommunicated him, and he excommunicated the church, and 1,000 Protestant sects bloomed, each declaring that we have finally got it right. So the rest is history, or more accurately, franchise expansion. Today, Christianity has over 40,000 denominations, each claiming divine truth while contradicting one another. Some worship Jesus as a cosmic socialist, others as a capitalist CEO. Some dance, some handle snakes, some chant in Latin, and yet they all insist that their revelation came straight from God. But if God is that confusing, he might want to hire an editor to get this shit straight. So this is the truth believers can't stand. Christianity evolved like any human institution through argument, adaptation, and power struggles. The doctrine of the Trinity, the virgin birth, and the original sin weren't whispered by angels. They were hammered out by committees centuries after Jesus' death. What Christians call the Word of God are the minutes of meetings held by men who couldn't agree on lunch. And let's not pretend this evolution stopped in the Middle Ages. Today, megachurch preach a gospel of prosperity, where Jesus doubles as your financial advisor and God is an ATM with good lighting. And so the same faith that once condemned greed now funds it. The religion that started as a protest against empire has become the empire's public relations wing. And quite frankly, with the GOP, it has become, white Christian nationalism has become their through line. All right, so what is the bottom line for the lesson today? Let's be clear. Jesus did not create Christianity. He wasn't a Christian, and he didn't preach Christianity. He preached a radical form of Judaism. What created Christianity was the empire, the Roman Empire. Paul sowed it, the church industrialized it, and modern America merchandised it. What believers call the unchanging Word of God is actually the most successful rebranding product in human history. If Jesus walked into a modern church, he wouldn't recognize it. He would flip over the collection plates again and tell the pastor to stop pretending to speak for him. But they'd crucify him all over again, this time for heresy against their brand. And that's the divine comedy of Christianity, a movement born out of a failed prophecy, sustained by revision and glorified by power. There's nothing supernatural about it, just the usual ingredients of human history: fear, control, and profit. So when someone tells you that Christianity is divinely inspired, remind them no, it's man-made, repeatedly patched, and still in beta. God didn't write this script, Rome did, and the church has been performing it ever since. All right, that is it for this week's segment of Bible Study with an Atheist. So we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have reflections and call to action, and then after that, we'll close things out for this week. All right, welcome back. And welcome to the segment Reflections and Call to Action. So what did we learn this week? Well, this week we confronted the truth that exploitation, economic, political, and spiritual, is a common thread running through every system of power in America. It is systematic and systemic racism, which has a profit modem to exploit the labor, the creativity, the influence of black people to the benefit of white people. And Angela Davis reminded us that racism has never been about hatred alone. It has always been about profit. From the plantation to the factory floor, racism serves as a justification for super exploitation, the engine of capitalism that keeps black labor cheap and black progress contained. In politics, the current government shutdown exposed the same logic in motion. Working people held hostage by political theater, and both of the parties are posturing, and one of them at least is on the right side of the story, but both of them are blaming the other for what they themselves have done in the past. And so the engine of it is even with that, it is that hierarchy that Angela Davis described that is at play, with the Republicans wanting to continue to fund the super rich and to strip the poor of even the meager benefits that they do have. Now, we also saw that the GOP's moral rot is no longer hidden, if it ever was. The Young Republicans' racist group chats and J.D. Vance's refusal to condemn them prove that white supremacy isn't a fringe problem within the party. It's the party's doctrine dressed up as patriotism. And religion didn't escape scrutiny either. The arrest of another Catholic priest for child abuse showed once again how institutions claiming divine authority often become shelters for predators, not sanctuaries for the vulnerable. And then we ended on a light note and not despair. Emil Welbeeken's story stands as proof of black brilliance, honesty, and creativity remain revolutionary forces. His career from Vibe to Native Son Now shows how to build power without permission and redefine what excellence looks like for the black community. So the message through it all is simple. Racism, greed, and hypocrisy persist because they are profitable. Liberation begins when we make justice profitable instead, and we build systems that feed our people, not the oppressors. And to that end, what must we do now? So I would say that we need to understand the economics of racism. It's not a glitch, it's the design. Know how your labor, spending, and votes are used to sustain inequality. And that's why I always say that no black person should ever vote for a Republican. Because again, as we saw today, the Republicans' core message is racism and it is white supremacy. So if you are black and voting for the Republicans, you believe in white supremacy. You should reject political theater and hold every party accountable and demand governance that prioritizes human needs over partisan optics. And call out white supremacy in every form, from online chats to the halls of power. Silence is complicity. In Texas, where I live, there's an ad that has been running as an example about John Cornyn's race and how he votes with Trump 99% of the time. And it says, call him and thank him. I haven't done so yet, but I am going to call that number and provide him a piece of my mind, and it's not going to be a motherfucking thanks. And again, demand accountability from religious institutions. I say that almost every week, but the statistics seem to show that we still aren't doing that. But there should be no moral exemptions for corruption or abuse within religious institutions. And then follow Emil Welbeeken's motto, build and don't beg. Create your own spaces, networks, and media that reflect black truth and black pride. And then lastly, tie liberation to material change. So freedom means ownership and opportunity and security, not just slogans or nice taglines. So the lesson is that we cannot moralize our way to freedom. Real liberation begins when we change the systems that make exploitation possible, and that work has to begin with us. All right, that is it for Reflections and Call to Action, and also for our podcast this week. So we are going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we are going to close things out for this week. right, welcome back. And welcome. We're just going to close things out today. And so let's go ahead and get started with that. So, first thing I just want to say is if you are watching this on YouTube, please feel free to like the show and subscribe to the channel. And if you have any feedback, you can leave a comment right there in YouTube. If you are listening to the audio podcast, then if you have any feedback for the show, send the feedback to an email to feedback@rationalblackthought.com. That email address is feedback@rationalblackthought.com, and I will be sure to review it there. If you get an opportunity, check out the website. I still haven't posted a blog in the last couple of weeks, but I'm going to try to get to that this week. I do want to remind you that this podcast is available on a lot of platforms. YouTube. It's also available on Sketcher and Apple Podcasts, Google, as well as many others. But if it's not on the platform, if you send me a note, I'll get it added wherever you listen to your podcast. And if it's a feature of your podcast, leave me a 5-star review. And I would like to remind you that the intro music you heard was Transcend by KIRK, and the outro music that just completed was Ending by Micaiah Beats. And I leave you with these words from Frederick Douglass. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want the rain without the thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, and it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. All right, that's it, everyone. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to having you back on the show next week. And I'm already working on the strategies for Black Power. We're going to be talking about another book that I read some time ago, very similar in nature to Blueprint for Black Power from Dr. Amos Wilson. And this one is called Powernomics. So if you want to look up that book and be ready for me next week, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that book also in combination with the integration of Afrocentricity and Pan-Africanism, because I believe that those two things, along with the Blueprint for Black Power and Powernomics, is what we need. But I'm also going to talk about then the fact that the author of Powernomics thought that by 2005 that we would have created a new system that was beneficial to Black people, and it didn't happen. And of course, Dr. Amos Wilson produced something that he thought would produce power for Black people, and that didn't happen. And we're at a point now where I believe we're running out of time, and we need to go back and pick up these things, find out what didn't work or what failed, and then move forward. And we have to do it now. There's some urgency around this. We're getting to a point where if we don't make a move soon, it's going to be too late. And by too late, I mean forever. If we don't make a move, and I don't have a specific timeline within the next 5 years or whatever, but we're going to get to a point where structural racism is so embedded within the worldwide society that it will never, ever change unless there's some worldwide disaster that resets everything to zero, which hopefully that won't happen. So anyway, I've talked a little bit too long in this closing, so see you all next week. And like I said, look up information on the book Powernomics, and be ready with some questions and some input on the show for next week. All right. Talk to you next week.